All right, welcome back to Realize the Self. I'm Mark, and in today's video, I'm going to go over a unique perspective and methodology for awakening. This one's from George Ivanov Gurdjieff, Gurdjieff. He was born 1866 to 1949. Some say 1877, but the early 1900s, basically. He was a philosopher, mystic, spiritual teacher, composer, and movements teacher. He was born in the Russian Empire. He briefly became a citizen of the First Republic of Armenia after its formation in 1918, but fled the impending Red Army invasion of Armenia in 1920. Which rendered him stateless in the early 1920s. He applied for British citizenship, but his application was denied. He then settled in France, where he lived and taught for the rest of his life. Gurdjieff taught that people are unconscious of themselves and thus live their lives in a state of hypnotic waking sleep, but that it is possible to awaken to a higher state of consciousness and serve our purpose as human beings. His student, P.D. Ouspensky, referred to Gurdjieff's teachings as the fourth way. Gurdjieff's teachings has inspired the formation of many groups around the world. After his death in 1949, the Gurdjieff Foundation in Paris was established and led by his close pupil, Jeanne Salzman, in cooperation with other direct pupils of Gurdjieff until her death in 1990, and then by her son until 2001. So we're going to go over some of the methodologies, the unique methodologies he taught for awakening. And he understood this. He read the Upanishads. He read a lot of ancient texts. He knew that what the self was, on how to realize the self. And one of his main ideas is humanity is asleep. So we're going to go over a few things right now. He states that man is asleep. He lives and acts in a state of waking sleep. So we're in a state of automation. What does this mean? This means that 95% of our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are subconscious. Our habits, our routines, our bodily functions, breathing, heart rate, but also like our thoughts, beliefs, programs, all this stuff is subconscious, and it's basically we're just operating like a machine in sleep, basically deep sleep. And what's interesting too it's interesting to note that 80% of our thoughts are negative. The average person thinks about 60,000 thoughts per day, and 80% of those thoughts are negative, which is interesting as well, because the day before, your thoughts are the same as the day before. 95% of those thoughts are the same. So people are in perpetual negative thought loops. And in essence, this is co-creating. We're not completely creating our reality, but those negative thoughts are creating they're having a negative effect, let's say. There's all sorts of effects from other people, from the world, from energies, external energies. But in essence, if you have a predominantly negative thought, a negative mind, that will increase the level of negativity that occurs in your life. There's no doubt about that. That's definitely for sure. And so as we keep going, when he says man's asleep, what he's talking about is people function mechanically, like robots, like automated robots. Thoughts, emotions, and actions are reactions, not conscious choices. We're reacting, not acting, is what he's saying. And it goes in with that 95% of all our thoughts, actions, beliefs, all this stuff is subconscious. What we call self is actually a bundle of changing impulses. It's not the real self, it's the false self, the egoic self, the little self. And that's where the Sufis talk about fana, annihilation of that false self, which they refer to as nafs, N-A-F-S, if I remember correctly. But he also states, Gurdjieff says, there's no permanent I. Essential shock in Gurdjieff's teachings, there is no unified permanent self. Instead, there are many small contradictory I's. I want, I hate, I promise, I forget. I this, I that. Each I appears briefly, takes control, and disappears. The tragedy is that we believe we are that little I. And that's a complete falsity. And the Upanishads teaches it's avidya, or ignorance. That's the root cause of of suffering, essentially, and reincarnation and karma. He states, awakening begins with this illusion, when this illusion is directly observed, not intellectually accepted. So there you go. There's another hint to the observer, the witness, the self, the real self within. Self-remembering is the core practice of what Gurdjieff teaches. The essential practice in his system is self-remembering. This means being aware of yourself and what you're doing at the same time, dividing attention, one part on the outer and one part on the inner sense of I'm here. So if you're doing something like you're riding a bike, driving a car, doing the dishes, cleaning, watching TV, you're going to have a part of yourself that's aware on the outer action. So you're aware you're doing the dishes, but you're also aware of the awareness within. So the I am presence. And so that's a really powerful technique, and definitely recommend this practice. This is not self-analysis, he states, or thinking about oneself. It is direct presence. Try to remember yourself for 1 minute. Most people cannot. And I used to start all the videos off with if you can be aware of your mind, who is the one that is aware of the mind? There has to be an observer, there has to be a witness, there has to be an awareness, a presence there that has to be the one observing it, and that's the true you, that's the true self. He goes on to state, awakening is against habit and comfort. Awakening does not happen through belief, morality, or passive meditation alone. Gurdjieff insists consciousness grows through intentional struggle. One must work against habit, laziness, identification, automatic emotional reactions. This struggle creates friction, and friction produces awakening. In the book, I talk about two vectors to self-realization. One is through a curiosity type of vector where you're curious to know who you are. The other one is more through intense suffering, a longing to know the self that comes about through intense suffering or tragedy or pain. And so for most people, it's the pain, tragedy, suffering, but hopefully we could avoid that. People can avoid that if they choose and take the curiosity vector. But the struggle creates friction. Friction produces awakening. That's very powerful. Some say there's no purpose to struggle, pain, suffering, but there actually is. It can lead you to the self, and that's the most beautiful aspect of suffering, pain, tragedy. All this can help you realize the self, and use it. Use it. Conscious suffering versus mechanical suffering. A crucial distinction he makes is mechanical suffering is unconscious reaction, complaint, resentment. Conscious suffering is willingly enduring discomfort without expression or escape. Only conscious suffering has value. It creates inner substance needed for awakening. He talks about the role of the body. Unlike many spiritual systems, Gurdjieff emphasized the body. Awakening, he says, must involve the body, the emotions, and the intellect. This is why he used sacred movements, posture, breathing, physical effort. Awakening cannot happen in thought alone. This is a very interesting perspective. So if you sit there and just meditate, it's not as powerful as what he's talking about, where you're using the emotions, the body, and the intellect. If you're just sitting there meditating in a dark room all by yourself, it's not as powerful. But awakening cannot happen in thought alone. The real I am, the aim of the real I and objective consciousness, the goal is not bliss or personality improvement. The aim is formation of a real unified I. Self-realization, in summarization, is what he's talking about. Development of objective consciousness, freedom from mechanical life, those are the aims. That requires long work, guidance, group effort. Awakening is rare and difficult and is not guaranteed. You know, with the book and all the techniques that I mentioned, it is guaranteed almost. I'd say very high probability if you do everything. I think almost everyone can. There might be very few people, like the saying, a broken clock is right twice a day. There might be very few people that just aren't supposed to awaken, but I wouldn't go with that mindset or mentality that you're not supposed to be, or you cannot awaken, because that thought itself will create that reality, and that will help interfere with realization itself. Just that thought alone. That's how incredible powerful we are as beings. The fourth way is Ouspensky talked about, but it talks about Gurdjieff described 3 traditional paths: the fakir, the body, the monk, the emotion, the yogi, the mind. He proposed a 4th way to work on all 3 simultaneously in ordinary life without withdrawal from the world. Awakening happens in life, not a part of it. So he's saying don't go to retreat to a cave, don't retreat to your room in a dark room and just meditate all day. That's not entirely helpful. He says go out into the world and use that to sharpen the sword, to use it as grease for the mill, or there's a saying by Ram Dass, I forget what it is. Grease for the mill. Oh, I forgot it. Okay, but you get what I'm saying. Use it for fuel for the car. Use it for to sharpen the sword. I like that one. In a sentence, what he's really coming to is awakening for Gurdjieff is a gradual creation of real consciousness through self-remembering, eternal struggle, and conscious suffering in everyday life. And he used really odd, paradoxical, and shocking methods that definitely couldn't be done today. He believed that ordinary teaching cannot wake sleeping people. What follows is he carefully grounded his teachings based on each individual and uniquely had them do certain things. So some of his odd methods that he used, and I don't recommend some of these, I'm just listing these just because it's interesting and it goes along with Gurdjieff and his methods and what his teachings are. Gurdjieff held that people are deeply identified with habits, opinions, and self-images. Polite instruction only feeds illusion. Awakening requires disruption of automatic patterns. So he acts as a conscious shock, intentionally breaking expectations to clear inner friction. Like he would just do random stuff like that, like just random stuff to shock people out of that mechanical living. Deliberate contradiction and inconsistency. Gurdjieff, he would like mess with their minds basically and say one thing one day, do the opposite the next. Praise someone publicly, then humiliate them later. I don't recommend some of the stuff. Change rules without explanation. The purpose was to expose the students' demand for consistency, to reveal emotional reactions and interdependency, to weaken blind belief in authority. If students depend on doctrine, he wanted to destroy. And this reminds me of the stories of Robert Adams, who's one of the teachers in the, I want to say the 80s, 90s, somewhere around there, but he used to do something called cooking his students, and he would have them go after one another and play mind games and be deceptive, and it's really I'm not a big fan of that doesn't need to be done. You could help people come to self-realization without playing those types of games or cooking people or that sort of stuff. There's a million different ways. I mean, there's a ton of paths up the mountain to self-realization. Gurdjieff would use shock and offense as a teaching tool. He often insulted students, mocked their spirituality, used crude language deliberately in order to trigger emotional reactions, make people observe themselves in the moment, to show how easily one is offended, hurt, or defensive. For Gurdjieff, if there was a reaction, that equals sleep. Seeing reaction as it arises is a step toward awakening. So that's another fascinating concept. We could use this concept in everyday life. So whatever triggers you can help awaken you. Use whatever triggers you to help awaken you. If you're in line, you get angry because it's taking so long. Use that to observe. Use that to observe to help awaken you. If you're driving, observe the reactions, the annoyance, the anger, the sadness, any emotions that come up that are automatically triggered, you can use those to help yourself awaken. That's a very, very powerful tool. We could use this in everyday life. And so the mask of personality, Gurdjieff intentionally presented contradictory personas. Sometimes he's a sage, sometimes he's a trickster, sometimes he's a tyrant, sometimes he's a buffoon, sometimes he's a loving father, a ruthless critic. The purpose was to prevent projection, to stop students from fixing an image of the teacher, to force work on oneself rather than on belief in him. Many students never realized this was deliberate. And I gotta say, I am not a guru, I am not a master, I am not claiming to be enlightened or self-realized. You have to ask the people that do that, who is the one that is claiming that? The mind is, of course. And what is self-realization? Self-realization goes beyond all concept. It goes beyond all mind. It goes beyond anything that can be communicated verbally. Just wanted to put that out there. Gurdjieff also goes on to talk about alcohol and excess. Here's another interesting way he used. Gurdjieff famously encouraged heavy drinking at meals, made students give a long forced toast, observed people under intoxication. He did this, as he claimed, to break moral self-images, to reveal mechanical behavior, to test self-remembering under altered states. That's fascinating. It's very important that he was not endorsing addiction, and there was a lot of criticism with this. Don't recommend that. That's a very interesting technique, but there could be some benefits from that, but it's not needed now. Sacred movements. He would use extremely complex dance movements that required exact coordination of body, rhythm, attention, and emotion. They were often changed suddenly, could not be done mechanically. And the purpose of that was to force divided attention, to expose inner fragmentation, to train presence under pressure. Very fascinating. A moment of an inattention meant immediate failure. And so that's really positive, as it grounds you in awareness in the present moment, almost like a flow state where you have to be paying attention to the present moment. Impossible tasks and contradictory instructions. He would assign tasks that conflicted with each other, give commands that could not be fulfilled, demand effort while criticizing the effort. The purpose of that was to break reliance on external rules, to force inner choice, to reveal identification with success or approval. For awakening for Gurdjieff came when outer obedience failed and inner awareness appeared. And that's another interesting thing. So break reliance on external rules is something you break the rules but not the law. That's something I think Arnold Schwarzenegger talked about as one of his rules for success, is you break the rules. And I found that is true. You go against the rules are set by society. They're societal norms, and so you go against societal norms because, remember, we go back to that Oscar Wilde quote, everything popular is wrong. So you have to go to realize the self. For self-realization, you have to go against the crowd. The crowd is always going to be the opposite of self-realization. That's just how this world's set up. It's just how people's minds are set up. So you have to break the rules to realize the self. There's no doubt about it, but don't break the law. Financial and practical shocks. Gurdjieff often demanded money unexpectedly, created financial pressure, lived extravagantly while preaching awakening. The purpose was to expose attachment, to bring work into real-life conditions, to prevent spiritual escape. Many found this unethical, others saw it as intentional friction. Number 8, storytelling designed to confuse the intellect. He deliberately talked about repetitive, difficult, frustrating, there's tales to his grandson, Beelzebub's tales to his grandson. The purpose was to exhaust intellectual arrogance, to force slow, intentional reading, to bypass ordinary mental habits. He warned that quick understanding is false understanding. Number 9, not many left. I'm just going to go over a couple more. Creating dependency, then destroying it. He often let students become dependent on him, then suddenly withdrew, disappeared, or acted cruelly. The purpose was to show the danger of spiritual dependency, to force responsibility back onto the students. Some never recovered from this shock, and there could be harm done by some of these methods. So that's why. It's not really recommended to do a lot of these. I mean, some of this stuff like becoming aware in everyday life or dancing or something like that, it's quite, works quite well. But some of this other stuff, it's just not something we can do or you'd want to do in today's day and age. Critical perspective. Not all of Gurdjieff's methods were necessary, were harmless, or should be intimidated. This is absolutely fact. A lot of later teachers misused his ideas to justify abuse. Gurdjieff himself warned that methods without understanding becomes cruelty. Awakening does not require trauma. That's exactly right. It should not cause trauma. Some of these, if they're done cruelly, can cause trauma. Shock was his tool, not the essence of the work. And the core principle behind all the odd methods were, every method served one aim, to make a person see themselves as they are in real time without defense. To enhance, to realize the self, for self-realization. That's the entire goal. When reaction is seen, choice becomes possible. When choice appears, awakening begins. And that's it. So real quick, there's one more in Gurdjieff's system. I'm going to go over one more concept. Shocks are not the goal. They're instruments designed to make self-remembering possible. So we're going to elaborate a little bit more on the shocks. Without self-remembering, shocks only produce confusion or trauma. When self-remembering, the same shocks become awakening moments. And here's a relationship. We're going to go over it just step by step since we're on the subject, and I've got a few more minutes. Why self-remembering is normally impossible. Self-remembering means being aware of oneself at the same time as one is aware of what one is doing. The problem Gurdjieff identified is life runs on habit. Attention is always outward or lost in thought, or usually lost in thought of the past or into the future, not the present. When you're in the present, there's no more thought. There's only action, awareness. There's no friction strong enough to interpret the trance. In ordinary conditions, nothing forces divided attention, so people intend to remember themselves but forget instantly. And forgetfulness is one of the tricks the ego uses with a few others: ill will, forgetfulness. I just said that. I forgot the others. Anyways, we'll talk about that one later. It's in the book, but... shock. Number 2, shock as an interruption of mechanical flow. A shock in any event breaks expectation, triggers reaction, produces an emotional, physical, or psychological disturbance. Examples: being insulted unexpectedly, sudden rule change, physical strain, public embarrassment, conflicting demands. At the moment of shock, mechanical flow is interrupted, energy spikes, attention becomes available. This is the only moment when self-remembering can realistically appear, according to Gurdjieffs. Gurdjieff's methods. Number 3, the 2 possible outcomes of the shock. No self-remembering is mechanical reaction. This is usually in the form of anger, justification, withdrawal, obedience, collapse, identification. The shock strengthens sleep because the person becomes the reaction. So you become disidentified with the ego, with the thoughts, the emotions, the body, and you think that is you, and that's ignorance, that's the avidya. But the reality is that's not who we are. The self is beyond all that. It is the awareness, the witness within, and that is you, forever abiding in happiness, the happiness of all happiness, the love of all loves, and the bliss of all bliss. That is the self, that is you. Never forget. He goes on to say, self-remembering is conscious presence. If even briefly one can sense the body, notice the emotion, observe the thought. Who's the one observing? There we go. Remember, I am here. Then the shock becomes alchemical. Nothing needs to be changed. The key is seen. This is why Gurdjieff said, remember yourself in unpleasant moments. And I must say, I did a lot of running, marathon running, ultra marathon running, and it did help shock me into awareness. It really did. I didn't know what it was at the time, but it was a shock. Shock creates the energy self-remembering requires. Self-remembering is not passive, it requires extra energy. Shocks provide heightened sensation, emotional charge, urgency, and calm comfort. Energy is too low. And shock energy is abundant but chaotic. Self-remembering organizes this energy. Why pleasant experiences don't work as well. Pleasure absorbs the attention, encourages identification, reinforces sleep. And what is... The majority of people in first world countries especially are in a state of perpetual pleasure, whether it be food, comfort, you name it. We just don't, even with the elements of cold and warmth, we're stuck in this perpetual state of mechanical living, basically. So intentional shocks, even exercise, even getting out of bed early, even doing something that you don't normally do will help bring about this awareness. And this is what Gurdjieff is talking about. So when you shock yourself, it forces confrontation, it reveals inner fragmentation, it makes inner states visible. Conscious suffering versus mechanical suffering. Shock automatically creates suffering. The question is what kind? Mechanical suffering, the expression, the complaint, the blame, or the conscious suffering, the silent observation without escape. Self-remembering is conscious suffering. Not enduring pain heroically, but remaining present without identification. And then goes on to state why Gurdjieff created shocks instead of waiting for life. Life provides shocks randomly. Gurdjieff intensified and concentrated them to make them unavoidable, to place them in a controlled context, to allow observation rather than collapse. However, without guidance, it was indeed risky. The exact moment of practice is, the practice is not after the shock, not reflection, not analysis. The practice is inside the shock, while it's being offended, while being confused, while being uncomfortable, while wanting to react. Every 1 second of self-remembering at that moment weakens the false I, the egoic self. It strengthens the real presence. It leaves a permanent trace. And why shocks must be small for most people. Gurdjieff used strong shocks. For most people today, this is unnecessary and unsafe. Exactly. Modern self-remembering works best with minor frustrations, daily irritations, physical sensations, or social discomfort. Principle is the exact same. The essence, basically in summary, shocks break sleep. Self-remembering uses the break to awaken. Without self-remembering, shocks are just suffering. With self-remembering, suffering becomes consciousness. And this is why it's important to know who you are, to know that you are the self, that there is an awareness, a presence, and that's the real you that is beyond all the mind, the body, the emotions, and anything. And so these shocks, coupled with that knowledge, will help enhance self-realization, and it's very effective to use some of these teachings and techniques in everyday life, and I wish you all the best. And if you do anything in life, don't chase the pleasures of this world. Don't go after money, power, fame, love, external of yourself. Just realize the self. This is the most important, the absolutely most important. There's nothing more important in your life to do right now other than to realize the self. You can do it. You already are that. You just must realize that you are already that. You are that. You've always been that, and you will always be that. You are everything. You are infinity. And thank you for being here. See you in the next one.